Hello, everyone. Welcome to tonight's class, Create a Pen and Ink Moonscape. I am your instructor, Adrienne Hodge, and this is part 2 of a class that we started last week. So if you missed part 1, you can watch the recording later on YouTube, and you can still stick around and stay with us tonight, and maybe just you'll end up with half a painting, and then you can go back and fill in. Before we get started, I did want to talk about one, or actually two classes that are coming up in this series. So these classes always happen with me, Adrienne Hodge, at 6 p.m. Central Standard Time on Wednesdays. And so for the next couple of Wednesdays in November, because next Wednesday is already November 1st, we're going to get into some color theory, and we're going to be using acrylic paint and some canvas paper. And over the course of 2 classes over 2 weeks, we will be talking about how we can mix all of the colors on the color wheel using just the primary colors in a set of acrylic paints. And then we're going to mix up secondary colors, and then we'll mix up some complements, and we will mix up some pastels. We'll make black using a couple of different colors, and then we'll also create some value scales of one color and a gray scale. So color theory basics, part 1 and part 2, those are coming up over the next couple of weeks, and you can sign up on the Michaels website where you signed up for tonight's class. And yeah, so keep an eye out for that. I'm excited about that one so that I'm planning to, in the new year, really get into some more painting with acrylic and oil paints that you can purchase at Michaels. Okay, and then tonight's class, I'm going to switch to my tabletop view, and we'll go over supplies, and we'll look at where we left off with last week here. Okay, so we're going to be creating this moonscape, and we didn't make it this far. This is my first example. I'll show you where we landed in just a moment. But first, don't forget to tag your work with those hashtags, Make It With Michaels or Michaels Classes, and you can follow me on Instagram at Adrienne Hodge Art. I'm also on Facebook, Adrienne Hodge Fine Art. Here's a little business card. Here's some of my artwork that I use ink to create. So this is a very entry-level ink class that we have going on tonight, and usually talking about my work that I use calligraphy ink for is not incredibly relevant to some of the stuff that we do. Sometimes it is, but it's very much relevant to tonight's class. So if you're interested, you can check out more of my work on Instagram there. Okay, so I also have this class from the week before last here, just because it really played into what we're doing in these 2 classes last week and this week. So Chanel has the link to that class. It was on value shading techniques using pen and ink, and we're going to be using the hatching shading technique from that class. And we did a little bit of practice last week on this skill, but if you really want some solid practice with the skill, you can check out that class. Yeah, understanding value shapes and ink shading techniques. If you're watching this later on YouTube, you can search those keywords. Okay, and then this is where we ended last week. So we got a little bit of our middle ground going, of our background, and we're going to jump right back in just a moment and work on the background some more here. We also mixed up our value using the liquid ink, and we practiced that hatching shading technique. Okay, let's go over supplies. There were a lot of supplies for this class. So the main ingredient here is our ink. So India ink or Sumi ink works great. Another brand that is sold at Michaels is the Winsor Newton black India ink here. The Higgins brand is also great. And then we have this Liquitex yellow oxide color, and that is the perfect kind of fall leaves color that we're looking for in our reference image here. And I do have some helpful tips for substitutes if you don't have that particular color of ink. So don't worry if you do not have that. Sorry, I'm just straightening up my camera here because I realized how crooked I was just now. Okay, we've also got some Faber-Castell pens. So we've got the fine nib, the small nib, and the extra small nib. And I grabbed a medium as well, but I don't think we need the mediums. I'm going to take that out. We have some paint brushes here. I'm just going to get my aesthetic back to nice as I continue going over supplies here. I've got the Princeton Select paintbrushes here for watercolor. Any watercolor paintbrushes that you have will work fine. You're really going to just want a liner brush, a nice medium round brush, and a flat brush or a filbert. But I have the size 0. I also have a size 1 here. And I've got the size 12, but I think I put size 10 on the supply list. And that size 10 brush is rascally because I had it on my desk twice now before each class, and it keeps walking away. It just keeps growing legs and walking away. Okay, almost forgot. We're also going to want our white ink. So I've got the Winsor and Newton calligraphy white before I forget and move on from the inks. You're going to want some paper towels. We've got some paper towels here. You're going to want a palette. I'm going to be using this ceramic dish palette here because it saves me some space, and I've got another little ceramic dish here. But if you've got a plastic palette like that, that will work great. Or maybe one of these. You can find both of those kinds of palettes at Michael's. And then we're using the Arches Aquarelle watercolor paper pad, which I do not have the front cover handy, but any watercolor paper, mixed media paper will work fine. You're also going to want a water cup or two, and I think that's it. One supply that I did not put on the supply list, but that is also sold at Michael's, is this package of these pipettes. They're very cheap, but if you don't have one of those and you have a dropper, like let's say in the Liquitex, you can just, clean this out a little bit and reuse it for your black ink if you want. Or you can also pour the black ink into your palette there. You just want to be really careful when you're doing that and make sure that you've got a paper towel underneath to catch any ink that's gonna spill when that happens. Okay, lots of supplies for this one, or it seems like a lot as we're going over it. When it's just on my desk, I'm like, yeah, that's what we need. Any questions about supplies before we dive in here? You can definitely use watercolor as a substitute here. You could use watercolor markers. Acrylic paint would be fine, some black acrylic paint. We can still achieve a similar effect with any substitutes if you don't have these particular supplies. Okay, and then can't forget our reference photo. Let me get our reference photo up here on the screen that was included in the supply list. So we're using this image of this moonscape. Okay, and my iPad is really not that charged, but apparently my charger does not want to reach over here, so I'm gonna live dangerously and unplug it. But I will, hopefully, if my battery starts to die, I'll have to figure something out. Okay. All right, so let's just get back to where we left off. We had filled in this tree line with our darkest value of ink that we created, and we're going to get our values going on our palette again in just a moment, but let's go ahead and do the part with the pen, since that's going to be a bit of a time-consuming process here. But I just wanted to note one thing. Last week, I told everybody to use the darkest value, like that solid black. And I was thinking that it maybe would dry and be a little bit lighter. And I realized that's really not the case if you used your darkest black with no water. I was kind of assuming that some people may accidentally get some water in there and that would happen. So I just wanted to point out that if you did go direct with your ink like I did here, then it will be pretty solid black. But the upside to having lighter values of black here is that you can kind of get this like hazy effect to happen. So the way that I did this before was doing a few different layers of that, but I'm not going to really need to do that on my tree line because I went so dark this time. So I think I was worried about us running out of time. And so that's why I did that. But I just wanted to mention that I'm not going to put another layer on my tree line, but you may want to do that. Okay, so let's work on this hatching. We already did our little practice last week, and we started with the fine nib, and then we moved to the small nib, and then the extra small nib. We're going to do that same thing, but we're going to start to create this layer on our sky here, and we're going to have this gradient going all the way down with the pens, and then we're going to add our liquid ink on top of it. We could do the liquid ink first, but then we would need to wait for it to completely dry before we could do the pens first. And since we're using black permanent ink that is not waterproof, we don't have to worry about the pens bleeding. So this is where if you were subbing your pens and using like a not permanent ink, you will have issues with adding water to this. It will make the ink of a not waterproof pen bleed. Okay, and I'm gonna actually turn my paper on its side here because this is gonna give me the ability to go really fast with my my hatching. And I'm going to switch to my forward-facing camera for just a moment, just to point out how I'm going to be using my whole arm for this movement. So the movement is really coming from my bicep, and it's going to be one big hatching line at a time. And you're going to see me go really fast. And so if you're like, how is she doing that? How is she controlling her lines and going that fast? I've got the fine tip nib. It's because the movement is coming from my arm, not just my wrist. So we're starting to build up these hatching lines. They don't need to be perfectly straight because each line that we put on can kind of cover up the one before. And let's just go ahead and start to pull them down, and we're being really mindful to not go over, which I just totally did. But that's okay. I'm gonna start right about here. Don't go over our leaf shapes. So note where your leaves are in your sky and go around those. I think I had kind of covered them up with that last layer of ink too, so I totally forgot about them. And if you need to maybe make them a little darker with your pencil, if you drew them nice and light like I told you to, then by all means do that. I might actually kind of sketch them with my extra small nib just so that I don't accidentally go over them too much. It's once I start getting that fast arm movement going again, there's no telling what could happen. And yeah, these leaves don't need to be perfect, so we just want some leaves hanging down. Okay, now I can get back to my bicep workout. We're really engaging the bicep here. I mean, I'm just being funny. You're not really engaging your bicep all that much, but you do want to engage it. The more you do, the more you can keep these lines kind of straight too. is by really letting your whole arm do the heavy lifting here. So are you just using lighter and lighter pressure as we go down the page? We're looking for this gradient to happen. And I'm kind of going back up and blending. And I've got the thicker of the nibs here. But I'm going to switch to that small nib in just a second. Maybe when I get about there with all of my lines. So just because I'm saying I'm using my bicep doesn't mean that I'm not using my wrist. Like it is kind of a flick of a wrist movement as well. And if that just does not make sense for you yet, and if you're just not getting that movement and it's just not happening super fast, there's no rush. There's really no rush. I never want to make anybody feel like making things faster is somehow better. So I've switched to the small nib. And one thing that is nice about going slower, like I'm looking at my other example over there, and I can tell I probably went a little slower on that one. I'm mostly just trying to make sure we have enough time for everything else and to show you how, you know, this can be done a little faster. But I do like how in my other example, I can see some of these individual lines. So the more I slow down, the more I'm going to see those individual lines. But if something like what just happened there is happening on yours, where it's like, oops, I went too dark or I put them too close together and it, you know, it feels like it maybe messed up the gradient. It didn't. You can kind of blend back into those areas. And also, you know, sometimes the sky does crazy things. Sometimes it can be a little darker in some spots and then still get lighter as it goes down. So don't worry about if you have like a little moment that kind of interrupts the fade on your gradient, because I think it's better to just let something be than to try to camouflage it too much. That can sometimes create more issues than it solves. Okay, so yeah, let's be a little more deliberate with these. It's hard not to compare myself to this one and see how clean some of those lines are. Like I can tell I didn't go that fast with the other one, but also I have the luxury of taking my time when I'm prepping for these classes. So the more evenly spaced your lines are, the more it's going to feel like this mid-tone on our value scale. And I think that really matters more here in the middle, just because we are going to have a darker ink up there towards the top. So if there's any messiness to our hatching lines up there, we can easily cover those up with the liquid ink as well. But here we want them to be nice and evenly spaced if we can make that happen. And yeah, I'm kind of locking my wrist and dragging the whole thing down using my bicep. And going this direction with the paper really helps me to make that happen. It might be easier for you to do it, you know, this direction, coming underneath with your hand. So do whatever feels best. Like, let me do the rest with this. So I switched to my extra small nib now. Okay, so now I'm really close to our little moon, our moon and clouds right there. So here I want to go just, I don't want to cover up my moon. I got to go back this way. It just makes more sense for me. Wow, my extra small nib is kind of drying up. Let me see if I got another one of these. Hold on 1 second. Got my pen bag right here. Well, that appears to be the only one of those I have. Oops. Pardon my noise. All right, I'm just going to keep going with that. I'm going to start down here at the bottom since I want it to be the lightest, and then maybe I'll switch back to my small nib. So I want the lightest lines down here at the bottom, and just using that extra small nib will just give you, you know, a lighter line because it's a smaller nib, so it's making a smaller line. And then I'm going to go ahead and use my small nib to fill in the rest of the space since my extra small is not very juicy at the moment. But I'm using a little bit lighter pressure on this small nib so that I can try to get something that feels more like the extra small. And I'm going around these cloud shapes, just like we went around the leaves. And we can reinforce these clouds with our white ink, by the way. Okay, that looks pretty good for our gradient. And, you know, I could go back in with the pens and darken it up here later if I put the liquid ink in and I'm like, you know, I think those hatching lines could fade a little better. Then, you know, always have the freedom to go back and, you know, make any adjustments that you need to. Let's see, how are we doing on time? 16:04. Okay, so let's get our liquid ink prepped again. So we're looking for at least 5 to 6 values here. Although we really are, well, no, we are going to need the absolute black again. So I'm going to take my pipette and just like last week, I'm filling up each of these little wells with more or less ink. One of them needs to be very little ink. One of them needs to be kind of half ink and half water. And then, you know, somewhere in between here. So we want one to be like just a baby's breath. That's super pale. So now I'm adding some water. So you can always just add more water to lighten the value. And you'll notice these kind of all look the same on the screen once we get the water in here. So you really have to paint those swatches to see the difference. I went ahead and just filled up one well with just water. Another thing that I do, because I know our ink, you know, gets in the water cup pretty quickly, and then you might not have any pure water left if you don't have an extra water cup. I do have 2 water cups here, but I have like an extra little eyedropper bottle full of just water. So that's a little ink artist hack if you want one, just to have a little bottle of just water nearby, so you don't have to worry about that issue. Okay, and then I'm just going to take some of this lightest value and add it to this one that was, you know, mostly water, where you can just barely see it. And it's really for this, since we, you know, you know what, let's take the time here for just a moment to go ahead and just, or I want you to do this. Yeah, let me grab an extra sheet of watercolor paper here. Let's test out these values first before we just go straight to our page with them. So I'm just taking a little watercolor sketchbook that I have handy if you want to grab an extra page of watercolor paper. We did this last week, but it's worth doing again just to see, you know, how dark they all are. Otherwise, I'm afraid you might run into an issue where you go to paint with one of these and it's darker than you thought it was going to be. So just test it out. Just see what kind of a value you have with each of these. Like that one is really dark, even though that's not my direct ink. That's coming out pretty dang dark. Let me make another value that's like kind of in the middle of these two. Okay, that's good. Okay, so I'm going to use my one that's like a baby's breath here. And then I'm going to use the one that was also pretty light. We're going from super, super light to like medium dark. That's as dark as we're going to get up there. And these swatches are going to look so different when they're dry. We saw that last week. So it's always going to dry a little bit lighter than, or sometimes even a lot lighter than what it was looking like when you first put it down. So keep that in mind. Excuse me. Okay, so I'm going to take my flat brush or my Filbert brush, and let's start out with the lightest value, and then we'll go medium dark, and we'll kind of meet in the middle. So let's start at the bottom. We're not painting over our moon, and you can always make this a little darker if you want it to. Wow, my water is kind of reactivating some of the ink in the trees, which is crazy. That shouldn't. Ink is supposed to be pretty permanent, and that's not supposed to happen, but it is. I don't know. Okay, so we're looking for this very light, and if your trees are bleeding, just that's kind of cool. That'll just create those little leaves and that you know, the little leaves sticking off that we're going to add. We don't want our tree line to be a perfect shape anyway, so that bleeding is totally fine if that's happening to you too. All right, and then once we get up around the moon, we'll switch to this little bit darker value, and I'm kind of going the opposite of what I usually do. Usually I start out dark and then kind of fade down with a gradient, but I guess I just wanted to ensure that we got our super lightest value down there at the bottom. I was afraid if we started out dark, maybe some folks in the audience would accidentally go too dark. And, you know, once you put it down with the ink, you really can't take it back. So you can stretch it out with water. But I always like to joke, it's like trimming your bangs or trimming your hair, trimming your beard, you know, trimming some hair. Like once you've trimmed a lot of it, you can't put it back. But if you just trim a little bit at a time, you can always trim a little bit more. So starting out light is like lightly trimming. Okay, so yeah, this is all pretty light here. Let's go ahead and switch to our medium dark up here at the top, and we'll like meet somewhere in the middle. And then this is where, again, you can always add another layer. In fact, I just finished a drawing and painting with ink class in person here in Austin, and my like closing reminders for working with ink in that class was it's all about the layers. Let each layer completely dry before you move on to the next layer, just like watercolor. It's equally important with ink to let the ink dry before you do that next layer. Not that wet on wet layers aren't fun, and look cool, you just really can't see and visualize what it's going to look like until you let that initial layer dry. So we are having to go here a little bit in between these spaces and the leaves, and if it's not, you know, perfectly filled in, that's fine. We have some tricks we can use when we get to that yellow ink to work out some of those little kinks. I would just let those spaces happen if they're happening for you. So yeah, I'm just going to do one layer on this because I don't know that we have the time for me to do a second layer and get those leaves on there. But you can always, on your own time, go back and add another layer. But I feel like that's pretty good. I got a nice fading gradient happening here so far. I might go just a tiny bit darker up here at the top. Oh, that looks so much darker. But again, it's going to dry, and look, I know it's just my one step up value here. And then I'll switch back to the other one to kind of fade that out, since that super dark layer I just added is going to bleed down. So yeah, just like a little bit goes a long way, and we can let that bleed down so that we have more of that vignette we were talking about last week. And if any little accident moments happened, you can always, take your dark ink again and go back in here on the edge and kind of straighten out or easily round out the edges again and just make it, make your whole frame just a little bit bigger. Although you'll notice when you do that, the impulse to like go ahead and drag it all the way around so that you don't get that weird streak is very real. So that is time consuming. Like now I'm like, oh, I gotta blend this out into the trees. I can't help it. Okay, that's good enough. It's gonna dry and it's not gonna be that noticeable. But I do want to blend it out just a little bit right here. Can't help it, y'all. But that's what you want to do. You do want to blend it out if you're getting like a lot of those streaks. Just go ahead, and if it's dry, if it's wet and you're, seeing streaks, maybe let it dry first and then see if it needs another layer. Okay, that's looking pretty good, I say as I keep tweaking it. Okay. So I'm just thinking about what to do next while everything is wet. Let's go ahead and work on our, let's go ahead and put our white moon and clouds in there, because we'll get a nice blend to happen right now while the sky is wet. That's not going to work against us, but anything else we do at this moment is very easily going to bleed into the sky. So I'm just shaking up this white ink right now. Let me clean out my pipette. Actually, I don't want to use my pipette because I don't want to risk getting any other pigment in my jar of white ink here. I'm just going to pour it out. All right, I probably didn't need that much of it, but that's okay. And then I'm going to grab my round paintbrush again. Actually had a different size round brush, but you can use that size 10. All I have is my 12. I misplaced my 10, so I'm going to use a 6 here. Okay, so I'm just loading up my brush with that white ink. And now I'm going in here to where the moon was. And let's go ahead and paint a little circle for the moon with the white first. It's not going to show up very strong, but just establish that round shape in case the shape of your clouds maybe got away from that circular shape. And then we're just gonna kind of streak it out here in a couple of different directions. Just make it feel like clouds, but try not to streak any of that black ink into the moon shape at all. And this is another one of those, if you're not in love with how it's looking while it's wet, let it dry and then add another layer because it's gonna look so different when it's dry versus when it's wet. So cannot stress that enough to just let it dry and then add another layer. So I'm just filling in some of these other little cloud shapes that I had here. You can add as many more clouds as you want. But I think that's pretty good. And I'll put that paintbrush away. And now let's get our yellow oxide going. Hopefully our sky is dry enough. And if it's not, we're gonna have some yellow oxide bleeding into it. And that is also fine because I had that happen the last time and I just embraced it and it was totally fine. Oh, I just realized I was gonna use this dish for my yellow oxide and now I filled this one all up with black and that one up with my white. So let me go ahead and use my plastic palette here. If you want to test out your yellow on a separate piece of paper, you can. And then let's say you don't have this particular yellow oxide color. You can use your, and you're using like watercolor maybe, or some other paint, you can use like a little bit of brown with some yellow. Or if you've got the primary colors of ink, you can make a brown using, let's say green and red. So you have to make a green first if you only have primary colors. And then mix in a little bit of that brown with your yellow. And if that is too much information, too fast for you, you can refer back to a class that we had called Easy Watercolors from last month. Easy Watercolors Part 1 and Part 2, where we mixed up a lot of different, wait, was that class where we mixed up those browns? We definitely talked, no, wait, I'm so sorry. That was not the watercolor class where we talked about that one. That was a gouache sunflower class. This is why I'm excited about that basics, color theory basics class that's coming up. So basically any of your primary colors along with a secondary color that is opposite it on the color wheel. So we'll make a brown, we'll make a neutral color. So your yellow and violet, blue and orange, red and green. Those are called complementary colors. And when you mix those together, you get neutral browns. So I really don't need to go into all that. I'm just trying to, I know there are probably going to be some people in the class tonight that don't have this yellow oxide, and I can't help it wanting to help y'all out. But a yellow would be fine. It's not a big deal. If your yellow is not a little tinted brown, you can have yellow leaves that are bright yellow. They just won't look as fall-esque here. You could also make them kind of like a, army green. You could do, orange. That's probably the easiest one, just red and yellow together. All right, in any case, I've got my yellow oxide and I'm just filling in these leaves. I just realized I missed a whole little patch of sky right there. That's all going to be leaves now. Okay, so as we're filling in the leaves, I'm noticing there's a few other little patches in the sky that I missed. So my option here is to just either leave it alone, fill it in with the yellow oxide, or come back later and add the black. So I think some of them I'm going to go ahead and fill in with the yellow oxide, and then some of them I'm going to leave them alone and come back and add the black. And if it's not looking magical and how you pictured it yet, just again, let it dry It's gonna look different when it dries. So we're just trusting the ink. It might look a little yucky and stark right there, but I've got a couple of tips for camouflaging it in there so that we can make it feel, you know, like a part of the environment here, which mostly is going to be camouflaging it with the black in just a bit. Okay, so same thing down here. We're filling in. With that yellow or your orange or your green or your brown and yellow if you were able to do that. All right, it's really coming together now, y'all. I'm gonna move some of this ink out of the way to make room to get back in here with my pens. I actually put the yellow and the white aside for a second, really, because we do want the black to come back into it. Okay, so if you have the luxury of time, like you're watching this later on YouTube, or you're live with me right now and you're in no rush, and your drawing skills are, you know, your dexterity with the drawing with a paintbrush is maybe not so strong, then you might want to do this with your pen. Right now, I cannot do the power lines and everything and the leaves with my pen because I need that moon to be totally dry. So I'm going to use my paintbrush and the black ink to do some of this detail line work because I've got the dexterity to be able to do that. I'm going to start up here on the leaves and kind of build some confidence, camouflaging some of those moments and adding some of these little leaves that are sticking out right here. But if you're like, ooh, I don't trust myself with the paintbrush to do the power lines and all this business, then wait for it to be totally dry and do it with your pen. We've got the pens, they work. There's no reason to challenge yourself too much here if you're, you know, if you're just not comfortable with it. So I'm going to do it with my paintbrush, but you can totally let it dry and use your pen. And then I am going to also add a few little stars with the white ink when we're totally done as well. But yeah, let's build up our confidence with the paintbrush if you're going to go in like me with your paintbrush here. So first thing I want to do is, I mean, if I had more time, I would camouflage, I would do another layer on that gradient so that it's kind of blending a little bit more up there because it's pretty dark at the top of our photo up there by those leaves. But since I don't have the time to do all that, I'm just going to come in with my paintbrush a little bit and start to add some of these little leaves that are sticking off. And I'm using not the full direct ink, I'm using the one that's got a little bit of water in it. And I'm just kind of stippling in. So using another one of our shading techniques that we discussed the week before last, and maybe I'll go a little darker with my ink. So I'm just adding these little leaves that are like the sticky outy leaves. Okay, and then once you're feeling confident like that, you can come in and start to camouflage some of these wonky moments that happened on your leaves. Also, some of our leaves are just casting shadows on each other. So having this kind of extra dimension here gives the sense of the leaves casting shadows on each other. And yeah, like I said, it's pretty dark inside of these leaves. So if your sky is as light as mine up here at the top, you are going to want an extra layer on that background gradient coming down. I just don't have the time to add it. So I might have to be like a cooking show and jump to my completed original over here real quick just to show you what that looks like. So fade that gradient out a little more so it's just nice and dark up here at the top of the sky. And then keep adding those shadows on the leaves until you're satisfied there. And then we want these little leaves that are hanging down that almost like feel like vines, although I think it's just the way that they're hanging, but I feel like it's a nice element. So I want to add them. You could use your bigger paintbrush for this too, but I'm using that liner brush still. This won't look so stark if our sky is a little darker up here at the top too. I'm going to go ahead and put that in so I can show you how we do that part. Okay, and then we're just adding all those little leaves sticking out. You can do the same thing over here on these leaves, you know, adding some extra dimension and shadows to them. Okay, I'm not gonna add these little sticky outy leaves all the way around because again, I'm worried about running out of time here. So it's time to do the part you've maybe been avoiding. All right, so start with the big vertical line of the power lines here, and that easy watercolor class that Chanel dropped the link to, that one had a power line in it as well, and we had a little more time in that class when it came to the power line, so I think we like drew it on a separate piece of paper and practiced with our paintbrush, so you can definitely check out that class if you just want a little more help there. So, oh yeah, those clouds are still wet, but it's fine. Get that strong vertical in there, and I'm using, I had a little bit of water in that black ink. Now I'm going to go back with just my direct ink. And this is where that using your bicep really helps you as well. So we want that little T shape up here at the top. We want that line to be nice and thick. And like I said, wait for this to dry and use your pens if you're not comfortable with doing this with a paintbrush. And then we want that T at the top. And then we want these little diagonals coming out. I'm going to start them like that. Get that roundness to this one there. I'm going to go ahead and put this other little electrical box shape on here. Maybe some of these other little details like this other vertical line sticking up. All right, nothing left to do but the part that's, it's not scary for me. I just know how it's scary for other people. So, all right, locking my wrist, using my whole bicep, and just nice light pressure, dragging that paintbrush in a diagonal line. And my hand just kind of shook a little bit there because I bumped my something on my table, my little camera stand thing. So my line got a little wonky and it's still fine. It's okay if it's not a perfect diagonal. Oh, I just realized I accidentally almost went in front of the leaf there. You want it behind the leaf. The power line's not going in front of the leaves. So get it behind your leaves if that overlapping has there. But hey, guess what? If you accidentally go over your leaf with your power line, you just make that leaf black. Okay. Power lines are weird. They stop right there. You would think they would drift that direction, but then we have these underneath, and then we've got these little little moments. So these little details, I think these details may seem like scary to like add more details, but I think the more details you add, the more it distracts from any, you know, imperfections that maybe happened with the rest of the power line. So I say put them all in there because it's just going to add to the interest of the power lines and distract from any weirdness that might have happened. So I get this other one in there. That one goes straight across. You know, and nobody is going to be taking your reference photo out and saying, wait a second, those power lines don't look like that. So if you add some extra lines or whatever, it's really not a big deal. All right, we did it. Now let's put some of our stars in there. This is my favorite part. So I'm gonna take my white ink and my liner brush. I cleaned my liner brush, got the black ink out. Now I'm gonna load it up with my white ink. And then, well, actually, yeah, I will show you how to do it this way. Okay, so we can splatter it on here. The only thing you're going to want to do first is rip up a paper towel. And this is a fun trick. A lot of people love this. So I'm just going to take some paper towels and cover up all my trees so that my little star splatter doesn't go on the trees. You could also just do little pin pricks with your paintbrush, but this is the easiest way to keep the stars from, this looks silly, but it works. Whatever works. That's fine. I think I can camouflage any stars that go there. Okay, I loaded up my brush, holding it like nice and still with one hand, and then I'm just tapping it with the other hand so that I get some star splatter to happen. And then now I can remove the paper towels and I won't have any stars on my trees. Or again, if you trust yourself with your paintbrush, you can just go in and just do some little pin pricks if you would like to add stars. There really weren't stars visible in our reference photo. I just think it adds something and was fun to add them. Okay, so we covered everything that we had. I'm going to switch back to my other example again real quick. And I'd love to see some of yours. So if you'd like to hold them up, our moderator can spotlight you and I can see some of your examples. See how they turned out or how they're going so far, because you might not be done. All right, Barbara, that looks gorgeous. Oh, I love those leaves. Yeah, and those power lines are nice and strong. Doing your little leaves details up there at the top left. Very nice. Oh yeah, look at those clean lines. That's really lovely. Very nice. Ooh, that one's very dramatic. Oh, Eduardo, I love how you got some other colors in there, the browns on the leaves. Wow, your leaves are gorgeous. And those power lines look amazing. Very nice. Yeah, so adding some other colors to those leaves is a great idea. I was trying to simplify it, but now I'm like, oh, I wish I'd added some browns and greens to mine. Ooh, very nice. Oh, I love the stylized quality that's coming across in all of these different examples. Y'all are some talented folks. And your different talents are coming through in these. Oh, that's another gorgeous one where your line quality is so unique and I'm loving it. The leaves are so unique and yeah, really nice. Oh, and I can tell you use some tape on the outer edges with those clean lines. where you peeled off the tape. Great work. That's Lonnie. I can't always see y'all's names when you're full screen for some reason. All right, well, thank you all so much for sharing. And if you post them on Instagram, make sure you tag me so that I can see them there. Maybe share them on my Instagram, because those were some gorgeous examples. I'd love to share those so that everybody, who follows along on my Instagram can see all the lovely student work. And if you're still finishing up and you want to, add it later, and do that. You can always share it with me privately too, if you want to just email it to me or message it to me instead of posting. Okay, any questions? Because we've got a couple minutes here. Got 2 minutes. I don't know how that happened, but I guess because not very many people shared. Are there any lingering questions?
I don't know if you saw this one earlier. Let me get it really quick. So this was about halfway through class, but Melody had lost her internet connection when you were doing the hash marks, and then you went over it with paint. She was wondering, what is the purpose of doing that?
Oh, I mean, really just to add like an extra dimension to the sky. Like you could do it just with the pen and not add the ink. But I just felt like it kind of blended it all together to have the gradient with the ink and the hatching lines. I mean, you could do it either way. You could do it with just the ink, or you could do it with just the hatching lines. But I think that answers your question. If your question is why do the lines first, that was just because of our time constraint. If I had no time constraint, I would probably do the gradient first with the ink, and then go back in and do the hatching lines on top. And then maybe if I needed to fix anything in the hatching lines, do another layer with the liquid ink. So kind of having that push and pull between the drawn element and the liquid ink, the painted element, just gives it an extra dimension, and doing it in that way just allowed us to, move from one step to the next. If we had done the ink layer first, we would have had to wait for it to dry before we would have been able to draw on top of it with the pen. So that was the reason for doing the pen first tonight. It was purely just because of our time constraint. Which, by the way, for those of you who are always wanting more time in these classes, you'll be happy to know that in December, we are actually going to switch from having 4 classes a month to having 3 classes a month, and the classes will be 1.5 hours long. So I am really looking forward to that as well. Our class time will be a little longer, and we'll have a little extra time to explore, the content of the class. So in November, will still be 4 1-hour long classes, but look for those longer classes in December. All right, so we are out of time now. Thank you all so much for your thoughtful work and participation, and I'll see you next week for the color theory basics. I'm excited. Thank you and have a good night.